So this is actually something called life between lives regression, which is when you are brought back into your state of being a soul and in that like soul world with the main objectives of asking any questions you have for what he calls the Council of Elders. Much like in all the movies you've ever watched, right? There's always some like circle of yeah, but like a group of them, right? Like a bunch of old guys who know like a bunch of shit. There's some like highest power that if you want to call it God, great. If you don't want to call it that, call it whatever you want. But then beneath them is kind of like the only ones you can like directly interact with are these like Council of Elders. And so they're like the most advanced souls you could interact with, and they kind of like govern over everyone's development and give guidance and also kind of like feedback when you come back from a life of like, let's talk about that, like what did you not do so hot at, what can you continue to do. And so this one is like you are regressed into that state of being soul, so like bodiless, and you are largely going to be in front of your council of elders to ask specific questions about like things you have in your life now. For example, like if you feel like you're at a crossroads, it's honestly actually a lot of stuff you can ask in your psychedelic journeys. Like if you've ever done you're like, what's going on with my career?
What is
like
the meaning of my life?
Yeah, really. Yeah. What's your purpose in this life? Blah, blah, those kinds of things. Prep work for this, as opposed to the past life regression, was basically she was like, come with 10 questions that you have for the Council of Elders or that you generally want to have answered. Come with a list of 10 people who have like had a really big influence in your life or like continue to have a big influence in your life. And we'll kind of like poke around for what we can find out about that.
What did you think was the thing that you were sent back to work on before you even had this session?
Well, okay, so I'll be honest, I booked this a long time ago. Like I booked it shortly after I did the past life regression, mostly because this woman that I worked with is like super popular and like booked out months in advance. So I was like, I know I want to like try this, so I better just like book it. So I booked it like over 6 months or whatever in advance. And so I didn't know necessarily like what I would want to ask yet. And then I wrote my questions like 2 days before I did the thing. But it's similar to a psychedelic journey. So in that sense, I did come with like, I've had some blockages around like, is this podcast thing like really what I'm supposed to like continue doing? Or do I have like other things? Because life is hard, right? You have like ups and downs. You come up with roadblocks and you're kind of like, is this the path that I'm supposed to be on anymore, So I just had a lot of those kinds of questions. And also like, yeah, we're on the cusp of like moving into the next phase of our lives, of like our last leg of digital nomad life before settling down and all that. So it was just a lot of kind of like, am I on the right path? Are there things I should be paying attention to more or like spending less energy on, that kind of stuff?
When you first described it, I had this idea of like, oh, you were sent on the earth to reorient yourself around this one specific thing you had difficulty with. And what you're saying is you have kind of like more than one thing that you're trying to like figure out.
Well, so we're all complex, right? I don't think it's as simple as saying like the only reason you incarnated in this life was to like learn to not be greedy or whatever, right? But like maybe that has been your biggest challenge in all of your lives, is like you're obsessed with money or something, right? It doesn't mean it's the only thing you have to work on. But I did bring a question of like, I think I asked like, what is the challenge that I've struggled with over like many lives and like maybe I'm still struggling with. I also had like, how am I doing and like learning my lessons that I set out for myself and those kinds of things. So usually you have more than one thing you set out for in a life, but yeah, there are probably like loud lessons that like are recurring. I think for me also it wasn't that I was like, oh, I know this is like my biggest challenge and how do I get over it. It was more like I have some blockages here regarding career identity stuff, but in terms of like purpose in life or like lessons, am I just like blind to some of these things? So it wasn't that I was like, I feel challenged with this, please confirm. It was more like, what am I missing? Or like maybe I'm not paying attention.
Yeah, there's some like discovery aspect to it. Got it. How much did you know about what this experience was going to be like before you entered it? Did you have a different expectation than how the experience was? Did you have no expectations compared to how the experience was?
I think similar to the past life regression, there's like very few surprises that your hypnotherapist is trying to like present you. I think they always want you to be like as mentally prepared as possible. So one of the main homework she had me do was watch an actual Life Between Lives session. Michael Newton, I mentioned this a couple times, but he founded an institute when he was still alive to teach people, to like certify people in his specific method of hypnosis. And so the institute recorded one session where they like did a session in front of like all the people kind of training so that they could see what it was like, and then they recorded it so that people can watch it on YouTube. So the homework was to watch it. It was like a 2-hour long video, but you see like exactly what's gonna happen. And every therapist is different, right? Slightly. So like I would say the bones were the same, but like my woman's specific method of like getting me to relax wasn't exactly the words he said, right? Because they have different techniques. So it's more like he said, imagine your favorite place, and she said imagine a meadow. Like they're just like slight differences, but kind of like the structure was the same. So I knew pretty well what was going to happen.
Did you feel like because you did the original experience, even though you're kind of like you're given a lot of prep work, you felt a lot more comfortable doing the second experience?
I think there was an impact. I mean, it definitely is helpful to have done the first one, and it's actually a prerequisite with her at least, and I assume with most people who do this kind of work, to have done at least one past life regression, because it's easier if you like understand kind of the state that you're trying to get into, and also less shocking, I think, to you when you like are regressed into those kinds of states. But I will say that day I made a horrible mistake and I had way too much caffeine. I drank it really early, but it was like a nitro cold brew or something at like 11 a.m. And so I was still pretty wired. And also it was like mixed up with like caffeine wired and like anxious, right? Like excited, but also nervous and those kinds of feelings. So for me, actually, the hardest part was like, it wasn't that I didn't think it was going to work in terms of like her method. It was more me like trying to shut my own mind off, being like, bitch, shut up. Like, this is your fault that you drank so much caffeine. You need to chill. Because hypnosis really, at the end of the day, is just relaxation. So like if you can't get your body to relax, your mind and your body to relax, you can't be hypnotized.